Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to do a copy of a drawing by Adolf von Menzel, who, according to Wikipedia, is considered one of the two most prominent German painters of the 19th century. Here he is. Oh, that's not him. Just a second. There he is. Here's some of his truly impressive work in the realist vein. And it's a self-portrait. As Wikipedia describes, Menzel spent most of his time in Berlin and was, despite numerous friendships, by his own admission, detached from others. It is likely that he felt socially estranged for physical reasons alone. Menzel had a large head and stood about 4 foot 6 inches. So as we've learned, that would make his proportions rather unusual. Here's what we're going to draw. This is his head of a lady. And I picked this for a reason. There's sort of an unusual tilt to the head. We're looking up at it. And most importantly, it's close to being a profile. And in the last assignment, a lot of you had trouble locating the eye correctly in this view, or views like it. So we'll begin with, hope you don't mind this little picture of me drawing. I figure it's a little more of a personal touch. And some of you might even miss me a little, so here I am. I found my webcam. Let me lock the focus here. And get rid of that. So if we start with the Loomis head, we're going to think about her hairline being way up here, bottom of her nose, the brow line, and the eye line, and the jaw. Ear is way back here. Collar. And I'm going to mass in the general shape of the hair. You're going to see what that does, including this kind of silly hair bow or whatever she's got on top of her head. Now I want to beg you not to sort of charge ahead and do your own thing here, because a lot of you are going to want to start drawing in the pupils and the nostrils and all those little details. But I want us to start instead with, we're going right from the Loomis to the shadow map. Notice that, if I find my annotator here, we've got this main shadow break goes like this. And that's sort of roughly between halfway between the brow ridge and the back of the ear. So here's the brow ridge, here's the back of the ear, and we're gonna notice that this curves across the cheekbone, which is a little bit below the eye level. And we're just going to try to draw this general shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. And the light kind of continues along the forehead. It gets hard to see up here, but it's basically doing something like this. Now the other main shadow shape that we have to deal with is this one. And I'm just going to crudely outline it. I'm also going to draw this kind of little extension. I probably should have included as part of the other one. And another little small shadow shape down here around the mouth, including most of the bottom lip. It's very crude, but I've sort of accounted for all the main shadow shapes now. And we want to learn to draw them as if we were copying the sea coast of Florida or England or something. Just forget it's a nose, forget it's a mouth, and just try to draw these shapes as you see them. They don't have to be in exactly the right place, because we're going to be able to move these darks around. And this is going to feel so different from the way you normally draw that it's going to feel awkward, like you're not really achieving anything at all. But you just have to believe me, it's going to develop some really useful habits. So the next step is we're going to just lay some darks in. And we can be messy, loose, it doesn't matter. Remember, you're going to be shading the other direction if you're right-handed. Boom. And what I want you to understand is that even though this doesn't look real, it looks like a volume. It looks like a three-dimensional form. As soon as you trick your brain into seeing what's on the page in 3 dimensions, your brain's going to start giving you much better advice about how to proceed in your drawing. So please take the time to get your drawing looking as solid as mine does. See how it doesn't look real, but it looks like a legible form, like we could see this as a block of clay or marble that's just somebody's just started to pick away at. squint a little if you have to. Look at it. If you're not seeing it, look at it with your eyes squinted so you can see blur them a little. And after you've caught up, got that far, we're going to start doing what you've wanted to do all along and put some details in. So let me just erase all that stuff. And we're going to begin with, notice that we did this little shadow under the eye. So that's going to give us a pretty good idea of where to put this eyelid. And I'm going to just put a little dark in there for the iris. No detail. I'm using very light strokes right now. I'm going to extend the point on this shadow shape a little bit. And this contour is obviously really important. This is the contour of the nose, the outside contour, which we haven't drawn yet. This contour is only the shadow edge. So this is really important, but we don't want to go too dark on it because this is a light background and there's light on the nose, so we don't want to create a lot of unnecessary darkness along this edge. That would just flatten it out. So we're coming around. I can do a little more detail on this shadow shape, the way it comes around under the tip of the nose. Can finally pop that nostril in. Indicate sort of the back of the ala. And here's what I really want you to pay attention to at this point before you've drawn anything too dark. Check the distance. Check where this contour is here, the bridge of the nose. And check where you put your iris in. And make sure you have enough space here to here. One way to check something like that is to triangulate. So you just sort of imagine a triangle from the bridge of the nose to the pupil, down to the nostril, and back again. And if I can do the same thing in my drawing, you can see that the shape of the triangle is the same. And if you're on the right track in your drawing, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see this triangle is exactly the same shape as it is in our reference. Now the next thing we have to look out for is this angle. If we go between the pupils and then we go horizontally, we can see that in this space here we've got about 20 degrees. So when you draw this line, make sure that you're creating about the same angle, because this dark over here, we can't see much of it, but this dark of the other eye is going to be much lower than most of you want to put it. Okay. Now there's a lot of sort of shadow bleeding out under the nose that I probably could have included in my first shadow map. I'm just going to sort of do that now. I can't see much of the philtrum, but I'm gonna try to imagine where it is. I'm going to put this central curve of the mouth, center it under the philtrum. Remember, this is the contour that really matters when you're drawing mouths, not the outside of the lips, but where they meet. And notice that this is really a small distance between this curve and that corner of the mouth. That this upper lip is really foreshortened. And the rest of the Cupid's bow goes sort of directly off to the right, and it ends about even with the inside corner of this eye, like that. This is the really interesting thing to look at, is how beautifully this little core shadow is darkened along the top of the upper lip, and then the way that lip turns the corner and turns into this extremely foreshortened form. A little half tone right underneath the outside corner, and that beautiful light falling on the lower lip. A little cast shadow on the rest of the lower lip, and a little cast shadow under the bottom lip. I'm just going to darken this cast shadow, core shadow a little bit while I'm at it. And now that I've established some of these forms, I can start to see a little error on the cheekbone. When I mapped that, it sort of came up a little too quickly, so I'm just going to push that cheekbone to the right. Okay. Notice that this shadow shape here sort of defines the upper margin of the chin, and the bottom of the chin probably comes down a little further. This doesn't seem like it was probably an incredibly flattering portrait. I mean, I don't know what she really looked like, but I think it's always wonderful to see a portrait that captures so much personality. It's kind of more concerned with, who is this person, as opposed to how does this person wish to be seen, which is the real pitfall of doing any kind of commissioned portraits. They're paying you to represent them, and they obviously wish to be seen in a certain way, and since you're basically working for them, you feel obliged to satisfy that wish. little tiny highlight on the owl that I missed before. I even had a good friend create a commissioned portrait from a photograph, and the sitter, he was an important man who was too busy to pose in person, actually photoshopped the image and removed some wrinkles so that he would be seen in the drawing exactly as he wished to be seen. But I think it's more noble to be remembered as we are or were than as we would like to appear. So I'm pulling back on this cheekbone, darkening a little bit under it. At this point, I'm trying to emulate a little bit of Menzel's hatching. Notice the way these hatching lines follow the form. They're kind of a dense web of hatching marks. I'm going to pull back on this collar a little bit. I'm even going to let myself smudge it a little bit. Notice Menzel doesn't smudge instead of hatching, but rather as a way to sort of knock out the white behind the hatching in areas of shadow, which creates a little more drama. I'm not a big fan of smudging, but there is a place for it. The worst thing about smudging is that people who start to smudge too soon never learn how to hatch, and their drawings suffer a lot as a consequence. Even though I am trying to follow some of Menzel's lines, this is what we'd call a free copy and not a close copy, because I'm not attempting to create something that could pass for the original, something like a forgery. I'm just sort of trying to learn from his drawing. Now I'm going to go in and finally do what many of my students are inclined to do before anything at all, which is actually define that iris. And shade it a little. Notice that the white of the eye behind the iris is really quite dark on this side. I may as well zoom in a little too so we can see what's going on here a little better. Kind of pixelated though. And there's that pupil with shadow all around it. That's the shadow of the eyelid onto the iris. Maybe a little small still. And I can go a little darker on this side too while I'm at it. Notice the main light in this area is not the white of the eye at all. It is actually this little shelf of eyelid below the eye. Very important to get your main light here, hand up here, and really subdue the lights on the eye itself. analyzing your drawing, you want to get in the habit of analyzing it in terms of form. So, for example, I can see the form of the nose in my drawing isn't quite beak-like enough, so I'm going to push this back a little, and I'm going to bring this shadow edge out a little to create that sort of hump in the middle of the nose. But I don't want this edge to get too sharp, so you'll notice my shading direction is going over the edge and not with it. Same thing that we were doing over here. And now I can see that the presence of some pure white down in this area is sort of flattening that. And I need to sort of lay a halftone in to unify that. I want to save my lights for my highlights, for my forms that are really prominent. I don't want these forms to compete. And after unifying an area, see how it just sort of recedes into shadow more convincingly? After doing that, I can always go back with the eraser and just pick a little bit of light back out of it again. So I'm starting to feel like my ear is crowding the eye, which is why I didn't do any detail on it yet. We want to get the face kind of locked in, and then when we go in and actually draw the ear, we can tease it back a little if we have to. And I'm bringing it back like maybe a quarter of an inch or so, but it's still significant. Remember before I brought back this collar a little bit, so that sort of forces the ear back a little bit as well. And we don't need to show off all our ear knowledge because we can't see too much detail in here, but we can see a little bit of the tragus, antitragus, helix, and then again just sort of push it all back, unify it. Might have to erase my first try on the collar and then just push that back again. And I wish I had a much softer pencil now, because these blacks would be easier to do if I did it's not going to be right until we do that bow. It's going to be awesome. So here's a little bit of dark that sort of defines the forehead slash brow ridge. You see what's happening up here is basically a lot of smudged in darks all through here, and then some darks on top of white through the highlight. there's so many ways to draw hair, and if you want to learn how, the best way is just to copy a bunch of different artists and see how they do it. The most important thing, though, is to realize that in a good drawing, even much more than a photograph, you can read a shadow edge even where there's hair. You see this division between the light and the shadow. Most beginners get so caught up in just drawing the details of what they think of are as the individual hairs that they really lose that sense of the volume of the head. And then when the hair has a lot of structure, like curly hair, you're even going to have to work on getting the volume of the curls, which is a whole other kind of challenge. Okay. I'm just gonna, this does not have much structure. I can't even really tell what I'm looking at here. Let me move my head out of the way so you can see. Perhaps she's in mourning for a lost relative. That would explain her somber expression as well. So we're almost done. I think we really should try to do something with this bow, though, because you don't see a lot of those these days. There's really nothing. There's no worse costume than a t-shirt if you're going to try to draw a beautiful portrait. Lapels and ties and these ridiculous big bows are all really fun to draw. And they just set off the head in a really pleasing way. So again, think of this as just a pattern of light and dark. And then after you get your pattern in, start to think about some of the forms you're seeing, but don't go crazy with it. Erasing some highlights. And I think I could come up even higher in the back of this collar. It sort of changes the look of the pose a lot. And there she is. I will be uploading this original photograph to your assignment. Just going to go a little darker through the core shadow here to show that little beautiful, strong reflected light under the chin. He basically made it a little too bright, but he just loved the way this light was bouncing off the bow onto her sort of wattle there. And I'm going to leave it at that. So I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.